Welcome to the Santa Cruz Coffee Break. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcast, please follow, hit the like button, or any subscribes. It really helps us with the algorithms. Santa Cruz Coffee Break is produced by the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum. All opinions are those of the speakers. We invite you to join us on the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum at SCGCPF for more fun. Now, let's get on with this installment of Santa Cruz Coffee Break.
If I don't know the answer, I will say so, and I'll look it up and try to find it. But the internet's a wonderful place for opinions, but that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to get the real story, and today about Redwood specifically. I started the morning reading a story from Gentleman's Quarterly about, not that I subscribed it, that got sent to me, and about the remnants of the communards up in Humboldt and Mendocino County that went up in 1968 to get off the grid and invent a new culture, a new rituals and society. And this is the last of them that are up there living in the Redwoods, having built their own communities and homes. And I just got taken back to the day in the Misty Mountains and the Redwoods. And I'm in the perfect mood for this.
So
Excellent.
With that, we'd like to welcome Richard Hoover to podcast number 73. I believe it's 73. Yeah, it's 73. And we're, we could fluff around and talk about how much fun NAMM was and how great it was to see everybody and all the connections that we got made. But we're going to jump right into science today. And it is science class, and leading the class is Richard Hoover. And we're going to specifically talk about Redwood.
That's leading. Is that a question?
No, that's welcome to the podium, sir.
Thank you. I've got I got a personal attachment to Redwood. Some of my earliest memories are, laying on my back and looking up at the starry night through the kind of black-etched limbs of the redwood canopy, and it evokes the smell, the feel, the hush of being in the redwood environs. And I want to start there because it's a beast worthy of reverence. And we've all heard rumors or folklore actually about how the Aboriginal people, wherever you go, worshipped nature and trees and so forth. And that's really misleading. I know personally from narratives from Native Americans that they're very well aware of a creator. They didn't think the trees were gods, but they revered them because they represented the infinite, the power behind the workings of the universe. And the redwoods specifically will regenerate. A giant mammoth tree can be struck by lightning, it can burn in a forest fire. And around it will go a ring of new redwoods that will regenerate and sometimes grow into one big tree again. So that renewal, that rebirth, was representative of the creator of nature in full force. So they weren't silly. They didn't make gods out of trees. They revered them. And the cedar in the Pacific Northwest, they used that wood, but they didn't cut a tree to take a board out. They cut the board out of the tree and allowed it to heal. And that's how much respect they had for it as a working part of their ecosystem. So that's a good setting to go into this. I grew up with the redwoods, and everything about them, the hush of the forest, the ethos, the compatible plants and animals is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And of course, we're not talking about that today, but it comes into play with how we approach this. There's two reasons to use reclaimed old growth. One of it is we don't have to cut a tree to get the wood. And the second one is the wood sounds better, which we've discussed. Wood over time, the resins polymerize, they become more resonant, and we get better sounding wood. But also the old growth forests were slow growing. They grew at the natural pace with a canopy, partial sunlight, fog, and they grew slow. And the density of the wood was very, very different than when the trees are cut and then new growth comes up. So most of California is, with very few exceptions, was clear cut, both for commerce and to rebuild San Francisco and San Jose after the 1906 earthquake. I mean, it was mowed down. So it's really unusual to find protected areas with old growth wood. So our source for old growth wood is secondary. It's not from the living old tree, but it's from trees that have fallen, rolled into a river, sunk to the bottom and stayed for centuries. They can also be on land. Redwood is very durable. It doesn't, it repels insects. It doesn't decay as much. So, let's say twin monarch ancient trees fall in a storm, and one rolls into the river and one stays on the bank. They're both viable. The one in the river we call a sinker. The one on the bank we would call a buckskin. And once we get past the decay of the bark and that degradation, we find really nice solid wood. The redwood as a tonewood is spectacular. And I'm going to explain it to you in scientific terms to dispel some mythology about this. I'm going to go one more step in thinking about this tree. We're lucky enough to live on Monterey Bay, and an incredible proportion of our oxygen comes from the symbiosis between the sea otter, the sea urchin, and the kelp. One eats the other, and without one, they won't survive. And kelp generate an incredible amount of oxygen for us. We go a few miles inland to these majestic redwoods, and the marine layer, which is the fog, is what they get their hydration from. They don't have a taproot that draws from an aquifer, but it's rather this, beautiful mist that comes in the mornings and drips at the tree line and gives the tree the water to move the nutrition through the upper portions of the tree. At its highest elevations, and some of these trees can be like 100 meters tall, almost 300 feet. Where the limbs start, there'll be a big limb that comes out and a little crotch between the trunk of the tree and the limb, and that'll collect detritus over time, and it will compost. So you get a little ecosystem growing there, and up 150, 200 feet, you'll find salamanders. There's a little crab that lives up there. It's an absolute wonderland. So let's go back to what we're going to do with this as far as a guitar top. And we have a little bit of a technical difficulty here. I don't have my notes, but I'm going to explain this to you. Redwood is a softwood, like spruce, like cedar, and it has a very high weight to strength ratio. That makes it suitable for something like a guitar top. We can remember spruce was used before aluminum or carbon fiber for boat masts, airplanes even, because it was light and strong enough to hold the pull of the strings, but light enough to be resonant. So that scale of weight to strength is where we get our scale of tone. And tone is a really widely used word, but we're going to use it today in the sense of the scale of clarity, from warm, blended to bright, clear, articulate. And there's not a right or wrong. Your playing style would dictate what you like the best. A bluegrass player, a singer-songwriter would probably prefer a warmer, rounder tone, whereas a soloist doing single-line leads would prefer a bright, clear, articulate sound, so that every note you play is heard separately and all the nuance that you put into it. So that scale is how we would choose a guitar for a custom guitar for a player to get the right tone for that instrument. So we're all really familiar with the spruces. We use Sitka spruce from Alaska, British Columbia. Engelmann's not really in our repertoire, and I'll explain that another time. We just don't need that because we can get it elsewhere with more consistent species. We use Adirondack, of course, from our eastern US all the way up into Nova Scotia. And we use variations I shouldn't say variations, we use the Picea abies, the European spruce that come from different countries, different regions, different mineral content in the soil, different weather, and they will have a range of weight to strength and tone. So we have this whole recipe of really it's a spice rack that we can use to put together the components to get a custom sound for somebody. So let's go to Redwood. First, let's start with some of the folklore about Redwood. Redwood is brittle, it's too bright, it's not appropriate for guitars. And then I know very knowledgeable makers that say Redwood is too warm, it's too dark, it's too dull, it's really not well defined. Just totally contrasting statements in this. There's also the folklore that redwood, and I could say redwood cedar at the same time, they're very similar, will have a short tonal life. It'll wear out, it won't sound good. Or that you can't really drive it because it doesn't have headroom, it'll fall off. And what's interesting about these statements that come from modern makers is they echo the story of Ramirez starting to use cedar in classical maybe 75 years ago. And the other makers said, nah, it'll never work. It has a short tonal life. It's too, it doesn't have any headroom. It's just no good. But this was before people had even had a chance to hear it over decades, let alone, half a century. So it's hooey. And it reminds me of the Aesop's fable about the blind man and the elephant. We know the story well, so I won't burden you with the whole thing. But the one blind man grabs a hold of the elephant's tail, and he says, "Wow, it's like a rope. It's very pliable. It's really strong, but it's too short. It's not good for anything." The other ones, of course, see different parts of the elephant, and they didn't find a practical application because of its limits. So let's go then to the science of the redwood. First, in my experience as a builder, and we've used redwood for probably about 35 years. So first we have the empirical body of knowledge that proves it lasts a long time, sounds great, etc. Every wood that we would use in the guitar is a generalization when we talk about its sound. When we talk about it being bright, dark, sustaining, whatever those qualifications or quantities we talk about are, they're generalizations, because when we go to the actual pieces of wood, the range can be incredible. An old growth Indian rosewood can change places with a fast growing Brazilian that grew near a waterway, grew quickly and is softer. So we can't talk about a piece of wood as having a definitive type of sound. We find redwood to have the broadest scale of variety in that regard. And remember, I talked about old growth versus second growth. The old growth wood that we use, and not just prefer, but it's just plain better, it belies the folklore about redwood being faulty as a tone wood. However, the second growth wood that's softer fits that category very well. So I'm suggesting that a lot of people that have formed opinions based on redwood did that, like grabbing the elephant's tail and saying the rope is too short, not good for anything, because they got a piece that didn't fit their criteria. So the generalization that redwood is warm, bright, dark, or whatever really doesn't apply here. It's a spectacular medium for transferring string energy to your ear, probably better than any other wood, and we'll run through that in a minute, how that works. It has a higher weight to strength ratio than most, so it can be clear and articulate, and its sustain is dramatic. And so I'm going to make this bold statement before I go into the science to prove this, is that redwood has the properties that would be the most desirable for an acoustic guitar top. And that's pretty bold. In fact, that'll stir up a lot of controversy. But again, this isn't my opinion. We'll follow it up with some facts here. And Richard, why don't we look at this first sheet that I had with you on longitudinal stiffness of the woods, that foil. And this will make you go crazy trying to read. But down on the bottom sideways, we have the different woods that we used. And here we have, Adirondack. When we say German, Italian, Swiss, these are actually all Picea abies, but they're different weight to strengths and where they grow. We go into moon spruce, and then we go into redwood. And what we see on this sheet is we at the lowest points are where we start. And then over the rise to the highest peak, that's the number of samples that we did to get this. And we can see on this first sheet that Adirondack will go to a weight to strength ratio, meaning the higher the weight to strength ratio, the brighter, clearer the sound is. The lower is the warmer. And we have this range of Adirondack, and you can see it's a little narrower than we'll see later in redwood. And then we move on into the spruces, the other European spruces, and the Adirondack, and we see the same thing. We can see the rise and the fall. And then we go to redwood, which is about halfway across there. And this goes from a warm point all the way up to some of the highest in brightness. So what this is showing here, over a sample about 300 tops, we get an incredible range of tone in this, meaning we can pick within this range to do a custom guitar that fits what somebody wants for their playing style. I should have started with this. This information comes from a modal analysis that's the most sophisticated to date. We've done this in cooperation with Stanford University's Department of Acoustic Physics and participation from the Naval Postgraduate School of Acoustic Physics down in Monterey. So this isn't luthier speculation or talk. This is really science that shows what we're doing here. I don't want this to be dry, but I do want the facts to contest anybody that feels their opinion is more important. So we move to the next one. And by longitudinal stiffness is when you take a half of a guitar top and you bend it from side, you grab the sides and you bend it there across the grain. The transverse stiffness will be, I'm sorry, I reversed these. The transverse stiffness is the next one we'll look at, where you flex it from side to side, like most people when you evaluate a piece of wood. The longitudinal is end to end. So when we go to the transverse stiffness, which is the next sheet there. Okay, great. So, here now we're seeing what most people do, pick a piece of wood and flex it. And we have a criteria where it has to be stiff enough to withhold the pull of the strings, but it has to be flexible enough to resonate. But this would be tested at the same durometer of every piece of wood, so that we're putting a consistent pressure on that to get these results. And here again, we're starting at the top. You guys can't see this, but we're starting with Adirondack. And again, the low point is where it starts, and then it rises. And it was cut to the punchline here and go to redwood at the end. And Sitka is actually the very last one. It's very surprising that we can get some of the highest stiffness on Sitka spruce. And that's some samples, mind you. I wouldn't have expected that. But we see the redwood here with this really long rise from about the middle of the page up to almost the end there before the Sitka starts. And that shows the range of stiffness within redwood. So one of the really important points here is choosing a piece of wood because of its name determines nothing. And choosing a piece of wood because of its properties determines everything. And the point here is redwood has the broadest range, the biggest palette of color to draw from to use in an acoustic guitar. What we've learned here is that the redwood has the most desirable properties for making an acoustic guitar top, period. Doesn't dismiss any of the other woods, but it's a spectacular tone wood. And that's what this is all about, is to give redwood the credit it deserves, the credibility for not only strength, but also for sound. And I'm going to dig my notes up here and give you a little bit more detail on this, excuse me. Again, this conclusion here is only part of the picture. These are little snapshots of what we found from, again, being able to suss out the properties of these woods through scientific inquiry. And this is one of my career goals. My background, by the way, is it's always been guitar. But when I started, there was nothing on how to build steel string guitars. Very little on classicals, but plenty on the violin. So that's my initial study. And that's where I learned to manipulate wood for the properties of sound, EQ, tone, sustain, presence, all those things, to be able to control those, and also do what's necessary to make sure that that guitar sounds the best possible. And that would be the sustain and development of overtones. So knowing that to start with, I spent 55 years now practicing it, and I have a great empirical body of knowledge in evaluating a piece of wood from, feeling, stiffness in all directions, listening, smelling, tasting, scratching even, with this to get the information that I want. And my career goal was to quantify that in a scientific vocabulary and then be able to have devices that would measure that and give us this data that we're using here today to get this. So we've actualized that. We're there. And we can take something like redwood, and instead of making 300 guitars and waiting 50 years to see what it does, we can verify our assumptions or contradict them if need be. So the whole presentation here, again, is to present redwood with respect it deserves and to debunk some of the myths. I didn't really talk about the structural part of it because I don't have the science to present to you today, but people worry about it being maybe too brittle, maybe it splits too easy. And I would say you have to think of the context of this. In your acoustic guitar, you're not going to put it through the stresses that would crack it. If you stepped on any guitar, it's going to crack. The fact that redwood might crack easier is really not of consequence with this. So I'm going to pause a little bit and see what. I got some more foils here that I'm going to show you. If we look at the next one, it says radiation coefficient. Yeah, now this is actually that weight to strength, which determines the scale of clarity, the tone of the guitar. And we have the same array here, starting with Adirondack and moving through the European spruces into redwood and finally Sitka. And what we see here is a real consistency through the redwood. Starting in the middle of the page up to those spikes, which are the Sitka, as opposed to all the variations between Adirondack, moon spruce, German, Italian, etc. So tone again, that on the scale of clarity, redwood is very consistent, which makes it very versatile for all kinds of playing. And finally, let's go to the one that says T60 here, sustain. So with the exception of very few styles of playing, people really find sustain desirable. Rich, full, long lasting. That's what our description of a great sounding guitar would be. And this shows exactly what we're looking at here. I would, intuitively, we might suspect that Adirondack would have the best sustain, and it does show on our chart here that is pretty good. Surprisingly, the German spruce is which is a Picea abies versus Picea rubens, which is the Adirondack or red spruce, is a little higher, but the redwood is almost as high in sustain as those woods themselves. So, if I look at this scientifically, I would go, wow, redwood's really one of the most desirable woods to use for a guitar. The most desirable properties present in the wood and independent of how it looks, which we'll cover in a minute here. We didn't do this scientifically. We reverse engineered it. I found the redwood to be really desirable, really great color in our palette, and all in all, having the most desirable properties of any other tone wood that we use. And that's an astounding statement standalone, but it's true, and it's based in science. Anything that we take out of context, you can get eaten alive on the internet as people share their opinions. But here's the science that shows that redwood has the most desirable properties for an acoustic guitar top. The different looks in the wood, again, the quality of the sound is independent of that. And if we go to the next ones, we'll take a look at some of these tops that we've done. Now here's a caveat. Never, ever, ever use flamed redwood in a steel string guitar top. The way that the grain structure runs to create that flame is almost like perforations. And the top, if it doesn't separate like a perforation, it will distort, and the guitar is going to be unplayable. However, in the hands of an experienced, intelligent builder, when of course we include ourselves in that, it's the depth of that flame that determines that. So this particular piece here, it's very beautiful, but the flame is actually super shallow. So you can determine this by, again, that longitudinal stiffness end to end. If it's flexy, it's no good to use. If it's very stiff, it'll work fine. So we got away with this beautiful dramatic look here, and without compromising structure. This is also a piece of sinker, if you will, and it's taken on mineral content from the water it was in for a few hundred years. And it's just a really, really beautiful piece of wood. Let's look at the next one. This, I believe, is Fort Ross redwood. Fort Ross was an outpost built by the Russians, coming in to colonize North America, along with the Europeans coming from the east and the Spanish coming from the south. And they got as far as Northern California, where they built this fort. And these timbers could have been late 1700s, really slow growth and spectacular looking. This isn't sinker. It would have been in a building, somewhat protected from the elements, and just, the same qualities. I can't argue that there's any benefit to wood being in water. There may be some change, but in our empirical body of experience, it doesn't seem to make a difference in that. Let's see what else you got here, Richard. Okay, here's another one. We call this San Lorenzo sinker because this would have been a tree that would have fallen probably from natural causes, because it predates Western intrusion influence logging, and so it would have fallen before loggers got here and tumbled into the San Lorenzo River, probably double-digit miles above our shop, up in a higher elevation, and got lodged in the huge glacial boulders and stuck. And it stayed there for a few hundred years. And that's where it took on its beautiful color from the mineral in the water. And we had a storm in around 2000 that was, a 1,000-year storm that dislodged this tree. It tumbled all the way down the San Lorenzo and out to sea for a while before it washed up on the beach down about 6 miles from our shop. And it took a long time to acquire this. There's a lot of stuff you have to go through to reclaim redwood because it's so protected. But this is a different part of the tree. It's got a slight little bit of the flame in it, but again, really beautiful color. So you can't judge a piece of wood by its grain count. You can't judge a piece of wood by its color. You can gather information, but it's truly the things I showed you in our scientific evaluation that would tell you what this wood is appropriate for and what it's best for. So the punchline here is there's not a good wood, a bad wood, a better wood. There's a wood that would be better for your application and your playing style. So I hope this is not too confusing. I hope it's clarifying. And I just hit the bullet points on this, the high points. And I'm happy to answer questions on this and supply more information, more footnotes, more credibility. But really, this is to get redwood the respect it deserves, not just because it's an alternative wood, but it's a spectacular tone wood in and of itself.
So, so Richard, a quick question and a comment. There are two primary types of redwood tree in Northern California.
That's right.
Can you identify these logs as to what species they are? Or does it require some in-depth scientific analysis? And have you figured out whether one species is better than the other? And then the comment I would make is in California, we've had the opportunity to work with redwood for a lot of years, mostly for decks and fences and whatever else, but it has been used for, interior work. And my experience has been that redwood is a very strong wood unless it's improperly kiln dried. And kiln dried redwood is where you run into that problem where it is so fragile and so easy to break. Because they cook all the strength out of it. But air dried redwood, that's good stuff.
Yeah, well, there's two questions there, and here I'm going to give a little bit of a opinion alert. Our experience is almost exclusively with Sequoia sempervirens, which is the coastal redwood. Coastal, it doesn't grow on the beach. It grows, up higher elevations into the mountains. But the coastal is the geographic location, and sempervirens is the name. And it is, this is what we've sampled here. This is the properties that we've seen. We've also worked with the Sequoia gigantea that's famed for, the oldest, what we think was the oldest living tree before we discovered the bristlecone pine, but certainly the biggest living thing outside of a blue whale on the planet. And those woods, which you guys are really familiar with some of the projects that's been done with some of the last remaining of that, is yet to be determined. We just acquired some from the Thule Indian Reservation that fell down in a storm, some ancient stuff's a beautiful story, and we're going to find out. And luckily, again, we don't have to build guitars and wait 50 years. I can take my empirical body of knowledge where I can evaluate this wood, and we can verify it through our scientific modal analysis to find out its properties and its strength. So the jury's out on that. It's certainly a great story, a beautiful story, the Sequoia gigantea. This is the wood that the trees that John Muir would have crawled up in his wool overcoat, the pocket full of bread, and swung around in lightning storms, to study the environment of the Sierras. Kiln drying is a real convenient way to get wood to market, to build stuff. And in effect, you're heating it up till the moisture boils out, which can disrupt the cellular structure. And it can be so hot, it can get brittle, just like you said. We had Brazilian rosewood years ago that had happened to. We've had mahogany that happened to, and it really compromises its structure. And I wouldn't recommend it for use in an acoustic guitar or any resonating member. We prefer air drying, and air drying is simply going through the seasonal changes where the air pressure on the outside of the wood gets lower than the pressure on the inside, and through osmosis it draws out the moisture. Also during this time, the resins polymerize and the wood becomes more resonant. So there's nothing like air drying, and the longer within reason, the better. However, thanks to breakthroughs in technology, we are able to vacuum kiln and imitate this process. You've seen we call it a kiln. It's not. We have a little chamber here at the shop that we make our own weather in. We create temperature, humidity, and airflow, and we can alternate those cycles according to how much moisture is leaving the wood over and over and over again until we get the effects of air drying, but quicker. Remember that we're using reclaimed wood almost exclusively. This means these timbers have been down for years, decades, even centuries. So we're not getting the bound living moisture out of it like a green tree, rather removing the atmospheric moisture. And we're able to do that both with the vacuuming and with the dehumidification to get that. So there's a mouthful. The bottom line is Sequoia sempervirens is our sample. We believe in that really strongly, and we will get to test the Sequoia gigantea. And for tone woods, kiln drying could suffice. It would be not as desirable. It would suffice if it was done carefully. But most commercial lumbers aren't made for, aren't processed for sound. They're processed for economy.
Yeah, quick turnover.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I just mentioned it because I think that's where a lot of the misinformation about redwood as a quality tone wood, comes from, is that most of our background and information we have with the material is building fences and building decks, and to try to apply that kind of background or information to building a fine instrument really doesn't apply.
That's really well put, Ted. Familiarity breeds contempt. And if you saw this stuff in Europe or the East or whatever, it could have been pretty desirable. But out here in the West, where literally we made fence posts out of it because it wouldn't decay and bugs wouldn't eat it, or barns or fences, it was way too common. Same with walnut. Walnut's a spectacular tone wood, but here in California, where people would use it for firewood, it was too ordinary to be considered a spectacular wood compared to something that came from a land far away, right?
Yeah.
Prophet's not recognized in his own country. So that's one of, again, that's one of my career goals, to get things like walnut, mahogany, and now redwood the respect they deserve as superior tone woods.
I actually have an old book on painting and interior finishing, and it speaks very highly of redwood because it takes paint so well.
And I will add that my house is built out of redwood, which we didn't know when we bought it. And yeah, it takes paint really well. I painted it 25 years ago and have not had to paint it since. With this, we've probably just set the internet on fire.
Yeah. Well,
boy, am I glad for that.
Yeah.
Luckily, redwood doesn't burn very well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Now, Richard, and Ted, me. I'm not trying to be contentious. I'm not trying to stir up a controversy. It personally hurts when I hear people rush to judgment about such a noble material, and this has come from really respectable and luthiers that I respect. But again, That's why I use the blind man and the elephant analogy, is to evaluate a piece of wood or two. You can make all kinds of assumptions. And I've heard expert experienced people come up with two completely different takes on Redwood. There's not enough common body of knowledge in Luthery to really accept it. So people make their own opinions. And that's really the purpose of this, is educational, not contentious. And remember, I started out with this as saying, I'm giving you the science on this. Of course, I mixed in a bunch of my own emotional stuff with Redwood, but I'm giving you the science, not opinions. And for somebody to counter this, they'd have to do their own science. And if we do science right, of course, we discover the truth. So I don't really want to get into a fray with this. I don't participate in news groups for the obvious reason. It would take all my bandwidth to do that. But, serious inquiries about this are to help us understand how to use this wood. After all, our purpose in making guitars are only the vehicle. Guitars are the incredible way to express your creativity, to send a message that can change the world, change international borders, fall in love. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And my promotion of Redwood is to promote just that, not to promote a commodity that we happen to have at the time. Move the halibut.
Go ahead, Ted.
I was gonna say, well, and what's really important is a lot of times when it comes to choosing wood for guitars, and you see this on the internet frequently, people make choices based on aesthetic beliefs or expectations. They'll see a piece of wood and say, "Oh my God, that's going to make a fantastic guitar." Well, you can't judge a piece of wood and its tonal qualities based on its appearance. You can find wood that looks absolutely gorgeous and is going to make a terrible instrument. And the same is true that you can find wood that may not look that good, but it's got the qualities and it makes a really fantastic sounding instrument. And I think that what we're hearing is, from Richard, is that you have to trust the luthier that you're working with to choose the appropriate wood. And it's not based on how it looks or what the grain count is or whatever else. It's got to have these other properties in order to do the job.
Well, and what I was going to say, that's going to kind of mirror that, but I hope takes it a little bit deeper in that the fact that Santa Cruz is a custom shop. And now literally you could take an artist and you could dial it in so well as to exactly what they're looking for. That's always been a thought with me is, well, you go order a custom guitar, how do you know it's going to sound good? Just because you're ordering a custom made guitar from somebody doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a great guitar. And right now, if you're ordering a custom guitar from Santa Cruz and you're communicating with Richard or Brenda or whoever it is and communicating what you're looking for, they can give you that.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. That's not a marketing phrase.
No, I'm not laying it out there that at all.
I'm trying to set the stage here. It's a larger conversation. It has to do with acoustic physics, the tradition of the violin trade. But everybody understands this. The quality sound of guitars is all over the place. You can buy guitars from $100 to $100,000. Of course, you could buy a $169 violin for somebody to learn on, but that's not the point. The violin has a standard of fidelity, sonority, complexity of overtones, projection. It's an incredible little machine, and it's done scientifically with the science of the day. The difference, really, I'll explain this, one more time to everybody, is a factory has to build a guitar out of formula of dimensions to be efficient enough to get the price low. Dimensions don't determine the quality of the sound. The frequency of those pieces do. So the violin, the secrets of Stradivarius was to assemble a violin where the components are in harmony with themselves. You get sustained development of overtones. If you copy those dimensions exactly, it's not going to be consistent. You're going to get random frequencies. Some will be good, some will be bad. That's really the statement to make. And some boutique builders build exactly the way a factory does, although they use beautiful materials, extremely cool workmanship. But the guitars can be bright, clear, and loud, but they're not complex. And this is the thing that that we have to do as expensive custom builders. Nobody wants to spend 6 figures on a guitar and or 5-6 figures on a guitar and maybe get a bad one. We have to be in the sound of the instrument. So again, it's not a marketing boast. It's just what we do. We do the work to do it, and I don't keep it secret. I'll show anybody how to do that. It takes a lot of time. It's expensive. It takes a little more. It's hard to run a business that way, but there's the nut of it. And so using the best possible materials, I should say, the materials that have the most appropriate qualities. No, I'll get it right here. The materials that have the most appropriate properties is really, really critical.
It's revolutionary, Richard.
Yeah.
I mean, it really.
I thought of that today. I thought of that statement. Because I'd be the one that would go, no, there's no such thing as better or worse when it comes to tone woods. And that's why I was trying to get this quote that I had here. Try to avoid the, better, best, all that. Let's see, what did I say here? Redwood has the widest range of tone and sustain and the highest quality of overall sound potential of any other top wood. And that's the statement I wanted to say. And it's bold. It sounds like I'm selling Amway or something, but you know where I come from. I come from over half a century of taking this deadly seriously. I've always loved Redwood. I've come to prefer it, and now I understand why.
Well, and you're not trying to sell people on only buying Redwood guitars. You're just saying that this is an alternative that you have to offer, that people who are looking for, a good quality instrument, you can offer this to them, and it's going to satisfy an awful lot of people.
That's great. In fact, I'd like to make a statement here, and use it or not. Richard, you were saying you can have a guitar made by, boutique Luther. It doesn't guarantee the sound of it. So let's go down to the wood. The reason I developed this modal analysis is to capture what I've learned from the masters. I stand on the shoulders of giants, but also, 50 years of empirical knowledge from practicing this. And it's hard to teach. It's really hard to teach. And what we can do with this technology we've developed is, at the least, we can sell someone a piece of wood where that's all determined, right? The single luthier that maybe built 200 guitars does not have enough of a body of knowledge to really make solid decisions. But we could sell a piece of wood that would have that evaluation, and the wood that was right for not just the best guitar, but for the guitar that you wanted to be for bluegrass, the guitar you wanted to be for jazz, etc. So we may offer that service. We're not there yet. We could either evaluate somebody's existing wood, or we could supply wood that was already had that evaluation to it.
Wow. That's, again, you hate to use the word revolutionary, but it is, because it's such a natural expansion of what you do.
Yeah. It's a dream come true.
It's the organic step that this wood isn't all mine.
No, none of it's mine. Yeah. Yeah, just passing through. Just the shepherd. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Yeah, I hope you can make sense out of this.
Well, I'm pretty sure that we will make sense out of it. I'm gonna sign us off, and we're gonna talk just a couple seconds afterwards. So, thank you everybody for listening, and we've been given a master class today by a very sharing and caring individual. So, thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm thrilled. You guys are such a blast, and I thank you for your service. You make the world a better place. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this installment of the Santa Cruz Coffee Break. For more music-related fun, please join the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum at SCGCPF or santacruzguitarplayers.com. If you have any questions or possible podcast topics, please contact us. If you have a product or service that you feel would be of value to our listeners, please consider adding your support and keeping the coffee pot on. Contact us for more information. We ask that you hit the like, follow, bell, or bookmark buttons so we can keep you informed of upcoming podcast episodes. We hope you enjoyed Santa Cruz Coffee Break. Now it's time to go play your guitar.